The code of betrayal. They say that light travels faster than sound, but in the dark world of digital betrayal, a lie travels faster than any fiber optic cable in the world. For 3 long, exhausting years, I lived with a man whom I thought was my biggest supporter, my rock, and my future. My name is Maya, and I am a software engineer and data security architect. My husband, Brandon, was a charismatic tech consultant with a smooth voice and an eye for high society corporate connections. He knew exactly how to talk to venture capitalists, how to dress for elite pitch meetings, and how to make me feel completely cherished after spending 18 hours straight staring at thousands of lines of raw, complex computer code. "You are going to change the entire world, Maya," Brandon would whisper softly, placing a hot cup of coffee right next to my mechanical keyboard at 3 o'clock in the morning. He would lean over my shoulder, his eyes reflecting the cold blue light of my dual monitors. "Your automated cybersecurity system is a masterwork. The moment your startup officially launches, the big tech conglomerates won't know what hit them. We are going to be billionaires, sweetheart. Just keep coding and let me handle the business networks." I would look up into his warm, handsome face, my eyes blurry from exhaustion, and feel an overwhelming wave of complete gratitude. I didn't care about the massive wealth, the luxury sports cars, or the high society status that Brandon frequently talked about. I only cared about building something real, something that would protect vulnerable, small-scale businesses from being completely ruined by malicious digital hackers. Because I loved him and trusted him as my absolute lifelong partner, I never hid a single thing from him. My private encryption keys, my development servers, and my backup protocols were completely open on our secure home network. I truly believed that when you love someone, your world should be completely transparent. I had absolutely no idea that my beautiful transparency was giving a cold, calculated snake the exact blueprint he needed to steal my entire life's work and leave me with absolute zero. The subtle, chilling shift in our quiet home life began around 5 months ago. Brandon's supportive behavior suddenly underwent a defensive, aggressive transformation. The man who used to sit beside me and listen to me explain technical breakthroughs was suddenly staying out until the early hours of the morning. He claimed that the high-end tech investment market was going through an incredibly tense, volatile seasonal shift in the city center. If I am not out networking with these multi-millionaire angel investors at midnight, Maya, the bigger software firms, will completely steal our market placement, he snapped sharply one evening when I gently asked why his business phone was constantly buzzing with encrypted notifications on the nightstand. "I am completely exhausting myself just to secure our future social standing. I don't need you acting like a suspicious prison guard the very second I step through the front door." His harsh, biting words felt like a freezing physical blow to my chest. He had never spoken to me with such cold condescension before. I felt an immediate wave of intense personal guilt, telling myself that his high-stress fundraising environment was simply taking a brutal toll on his mental health. I doubled my efforts to make our home a quiet, perfectly peaceful sanctuary. I stopped asking questions about his midnight investor dinners, forced myself to ignore the distant, cold look in his eyes, and quietly managed our entire household on my own. But a woman's intuition is a powerful, unshakable force that refuses to be silenced by polite, smiling lies. It is a quiet, persistent whisper at the very back of your mind that tells you something is deeply, dangerously wrong, long before your eyes can actually see the physical evidence. I began to notice that Brandon was suddenly taking his smartphone into the bathroom with him, locking the door securely behind him, even just to wash his face. It was the way his face would instantly freeze into a tense, rigid mask if I walked into the living room while he was typing on his private laptop. He also began spending massive amounts of cash on luxury items that made absolutely no sense for a mid-level tech consultant. He bought custom-tailored designer suits, an incredibly expensive gold Swiss watch, and premium leather shoes, claiming they were absolutely mandatory to project an image of extreme elite success to his wealthy venture capitalist connections. In the tech world, investors don't buy software from a man who looks average, Maya. He scoffed arrogantly when I pointed out the thousands of dollars piling up on our credit card statements. "You have to spend money to project power. Just stay out of my professional business and let me handle the growth strategy. My big funding round is coming up next month, and it will cover everything." I wanted so desperately to believe his beautiful words. I wanted to protect the precious memory of the gentle, loving man I had married years ago. But the universe has a very specific, absolute way of shattering a beautiful facade when the weight of the deception becomes too heavy for the foundation to hold. It was a quiet, rainy Thursday afternoon. Brandon had left the house early, claiming he had an all-day tech showcase with a major institutional backer 3 hours away. I was working diligently at my home desk, preparing for the final, critical deployment of my startup's core security engine. Suddenly, my main terminal screen flashed a bright red error warning. My connection to the primary development server was completely severed. A sharp, icy spike of pure adrenaline shot straight through my nervous system. I lunged forward, typing frantically, trying to ping my secure server rack located in our basement. No response. I sprinted down the wooden stairs, my heart hammering like a trapped bird against my ribs. The heavy iron door to the server closet was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the sight that met my eyes left me completely breathless with terror. The central rack was entirely dark. The cooling fans were dead silent. And the main solid-state master hard drive, the physical drive containing the absolute entirety of my startup's code, my encryption engines, and my untouched life's work, was gone. The mounting brackets had been unscrewed, and the secure data cables were cut cleanly with a wire clipper. The vacuum of space. With hands that were shaking so violently I could barely breathe, I walked back up to my home office. I felt like the entire world around me had suddenly lost all oxygen, spinning into an absolute, terrifying darkness. Every single line of code I had written over the last 3 years, the core framework of my cybersecurity startup, Aegis Digital, was completely stored on that stolen master drive. I had placed specialized local security locks on the network, which meant that without that specific physical hardware drive, my cloud backups were completely inaccessible. Someone had deliberately, systematically wiped out my entire professional existence. I pulled out my phone and dialed Brandon's number, desperate for comfort, desperate for a voice of reason in the middle of this absolute nightmare. The phone rang twice, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Blocked. A heavy, suffocating weight crushed down on my chest. I opened a private browser window and logged into our shared home security camera network to see if someone had broken into our house while I was deeply focused on my work upstairs. I opened the historical video logs for 11:00 a.m. that morning, the exact time the server connection had died. The video sequence loaded on my monitor. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a professional corporate thief. It was Brandon. The camera captured him walking into the basement server room with a specialized toolkit. I watched him cleanly clip the data lines, pull out the master hard drive, slide it into his leather designer briefcase, and walk out of the house with a cold, triumphant smirk on his face. He didn't look hurried. He didn't look guilty. He looked like a man who had successfully executed a brilliant, untouchable heist against a naive target. As I sat there in the deafening silence of my empty office, staring at the frozen image of my husband stealing my life's work, a dark, freezing transformation took place inside my soul. The blinding tears of shock and agonizing heartbreak completely dried on my cheeks. The desperate, wounded wife died in that exact moment, and a cold, hyper-focused, and incredibly dangerous adversary took her place. Brandon believed he was a smooth operator who had just pulled off the perfect digital crime. He thought that because I was a quiet software developer who spent her life behind a screen, I would simply break down, cry, and accept my ruin. But he had completely forgotten a fundamental rule of technology. You never, ever cross the engineer who built the entire network from scratch. I closed the security portal, my fingers no longer trembling. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the pouring rain. Brandon wanted a digital war. He wanted to steal my future to build his own false empire. But he had absolutely no idea that a real security architect never builds a vault without installing a hidden, unyielding backdoor that can bring the entire mountain crumbling down on top of the thief. The cloned blueprint. To completely destroy an arrogant predator, you must never strike back immediately in a blind, chaotic rage. If I called the police right that second, Brandon would simply hide the physical hard drive in an unreachable location, hire a high-priced corporate defense attorney, and claim that as my legal husband, he had full co-ownership over the startup's intellectual property. The legal battle would drag on for years in family court. My assets would be completely frozen, and my startup would die in infancy while he leaked my code to the highest bidder on the dark web. I needed a strategy that was perfectly silent, intensely calculated, and utterly devastating. I needed to let him believe he had won completely, while I quietly constructed an absolute digital cage around his entire future. I sat back down at my secondary terminal, pulling out an encrypted, untouched offline backup drive that I kept hidden inside an old hollowed-out hardware textbook on my bookshelf. Brandon knew about my digital cloud networks, but he didn't know everything. He didn't know that 3 months ago, when his behavior first turned cold and suspicious, I had integrated a highly sophisticated, invisible piece of security code into the absolute core framework of the master hard drive. It was a specialized, dormant forensic tracker, a digital ghost protocol. The moment that master hard drive was plugged into any external server network without my specific biometric clearance token, the ghost protocol would automatically wake up. It wouldn't alert the user. It would remain perfectly silent, but it would immediately mirror the target machine's exact IP address, clone its entire directory structure, and open an unreadable encrypted data pipeline straight back to my offline terminal. I booted up my secondary system, running a localized network sweep. Within 10 seconds, a bright green terminal prompt popped up on my screen. Ghost protocol active. External connection established. Target IP 192.168.42.155. A dark, dangerous smile slowly formed on my lips. Brandon had just plugged my master drive into an external computer system. I executed the remote command sequence, and within minutes, my monitors began to populate with his complete, real-time digital life. Brandon's private emails, his encrypted messaging applications, his hidden corporate contracts, and his secret financial accounts were now unfolding completely before my eyes. As I scrolled through page after page of his private conversations, the absolute scale of Brandon's malice and treason became crystal clear. He wasn't just planning to sell my code to a competitor. He had built an entire fake corporate identity behind my back. I found a secret business registry file for a brand new tech firm called Vance Quantum Solutions. The sole owner listed on the corporate charter was Brandon Vance, alongside a co-founder named Sophia Vance. Sophia wasn't his sister. She was a high-society luxury lifestyle influencer and the daughter of a prominent tech venture capitalist in the city center. She was also Brandon's secret mistress. The private text logs between them detailed a torrid, wildly materialistic affair that had been actively going on for over a year. Brandon was completely consumed by a desperate, narcissistic need to project an image of immense wealth, extreme luxury, and elite status. A lifestyle that our practical, tech-focused home simply could not provide for his massive ego. Sophia was his high-priced enabler, but she demanded a constant stream of luxury designer items, first-class international travel, and elite country club access. To fund this double life, Brandon had piled up a mountain of secret debt and was on the absolute verge of total financial collapse and public exposure. He had reached a critical breaking point when Sophia's father gave him an absolute ultimatum. I found a private email from Sophia's billionaire father, Marcus Sterling, dated 3 weeks ago. "Brandon, my daughter says you are a brilliant tech innovator, but I don't invest in promises. If you want my firm to back your new company, Vance Quantum Solutions, with a $5 million capital investment, you must present the completed, functional cybersecurity core software at our annual Global Tech Summit on June 19th. If you don't have the working code by then, the deal is completely off, and I will ensure my daughter cuts all ties with you." Brandon's response was immediate, cold, and utterly sickening. "Do not worry, Marcus. The software is 99% complete. I have full access to the development environment. My current wife, Maya, thinks she owns the project, but she's just a quiet engineer who doesn't understand the corporate game. I am going to manually extract the master hard drive from our local network, wipe her access completely out of the system so she can't block the deployment, and rebrand the entire framework under Vance Quantum Solutions. By the time she realizes her startup is deleted, the $5 million funding will be cleared in my offshore account, and I will be completely gone. I sat in the dark room, the cold green light of the monitors illuminating the icy resolve forming in my eyes. He wasn't just stealing my code. He was actively planning to completely delete my professional identity, claim my genius as his own, and use it to buy a new luxury life with his mistress using her father's multi-million-dollar investment. He had set it up perfectly to execute his grand theft at the Global Tech Summit Gala on June 19th, in front of the entire tech elite of the city. But Brandon had made one fatal, arrogant error. He was a smooth-talking salesman, but he was not a programmer. In his desperate rush to steal my master drive, he didn't realize that my Ghost protocol wasn't just a tracking tool. It was a digital fuse, and I was currently holding the match. Weaving the net. A traditional legal response is loud, exceptionally expensive, and incredibly slow. If I immediately filed a standard copyright theft lawsuit against Brandon, Marcus Sterling's high-priced corporate defense lawyers would instantly tie my software up in legal injunctions for years. Brandon would hide the master drive, claim the code was developed jointly during our marriage, and drag the process out until my personal financial resources were completely exhausted. I didn't have years, and I refused to spend a single dollar on slow legal theater. I needed a strategy that was perfectly silent, absolute, and utterly devastating. A strategy that would ensure Brandon could not run, could not hide, and could not save a single shred of his stolen reputation. I initiated my counter-operation, codenamed Project Overwrite. My first priority was to turn his stolen prize into an absolute Trojan horse. Using the hidden backdoor connection provided by my Ghost protocol, I quietly accessed the master hard drive now sitting inside Brandon's private office setup downtown. I didn't delete the software, and I didn't lock him out. If he saw an error code, he would panic and realize I was onto him. Instead, I let him run his diagnostic tests. I let him see a perfectly functional, beautiful user interface. But beneath that beautiful interface, inside the deepest layers of the core cryptographic engine, I manually injected a specialized, highly advanced string of encrypted trap code. This trap code was designed to look exactly like standard security encryption algorithms to any basic diagnostic scanner. However, it was programmed with a highly specific, time-triggered logic bomb. The moment Brandon attempted to run a live, full-scale deployment demonstration of the software using his firm's network servers at the Tech Summit, the code would execute a silent, cascading terminal wipe. It wouldn't just delete my software from his machine. It would deploy a highly aggressive, automated script that would completely clear his firm's entire local network, wipe every connected backup server, overwrite his personal hard drives with zeros, and publicly display his private fraud folders directly onto every connected presentation screen in the venue. With the digital trap perfectly loaded, I took my next step. I needed to ensure that the financial system was completely prepared to lock him down the moment the trap snapped shut. I used my anonymous professional consulting network to send a highly specialized, confidential piece of forensic data to the compliance and risk management team at the primary investment bank handling Marcus Sterling's venture capital funds. I sent them an official verified data packet showing that the core asset being used to secure the $5 million investment under Vance Quantum Solutions was currently under active observation for intellectual property, grand larceny, and corporate fraud. I included the cloned security video of Brandon physically cutting the cables in my basement server room. Panic-stricken at the prospect of being tied to a major federal corporate theft and a multi-million-dollar compliance default, the investment bank immediately shifted the funding parameters, converting the $5 million capital escrow into a highly restricted, dual verification lockbox that could not release a single penny without a final manual forensic compliance clearance. Brandon was completely arrogant, entirely consumed by his own narcissism, and completely blind to the digital net tightening around his neck. He spent the next few days staying at a luxury downtown hotel with Sophia, preparing his grand presentation for the Tech Summit Gala, completely unaware that every single digital step he took was being monitored, logged, and prepared for a public execution. The Glass Palace Showcase. The grand ballroom of the Millennium Tech Pavilion was a magnificent display of opulent success. Over 800 of the city's elite tech venture capitalists, software developers, corporate brokers, and media reporters were gathered for the annual Global Tech Summit Gala. The entire room was enclosed in massive 30-foot walls of polished glass and gold trim that overlooked a stunning city skyline, lit brilliantly by hundreds of modern high-tech chandeliers. Brandon was floating through the wealthy crowd like a global tech celebrity. His tailored dark designer suit was pristine, a crystal glass of expensive champagne resting casually in his hand. He was surrounded by a circle of wealthy investors and junior associates, laughing loudly, his chest puffed out with the unadulterated arrogance of a man who believed he had successfully pulled off the ultimate digital heist. I walked quietly into the pavilion, completely uninvited by Brandon, but carrying a premium VIP press and analyst credential provided to me by a senior partner at my auditing network. I was wearing a stunning, elegant emerald green velvet gown that featured a sophisticated, daring off-the-shoulder cut and intricate gold embroidery along the bodice. My hair was styled in a flawless, structured updo that accentuated my sharp, intense features and unshakable composure. I stood near the back of the grand ballroom, a masterclass in controlled, unreadable poise, my piercing dark eyes watching the room with a cold, calculation-driven focus that radiated a quiet, lethal power. To anyone else, I looked like a high society guest, admiring the success of the evening. To anyone who could read the subtle chill in my gaze, I was an architect waiting patiently for the perfect second to pull the floor completely out from under the target. Every time a senior executive complimented Brandon on his upcoming revolutionary cybersecurity launch, he would flash his brilliant, confident smile and speak with an air of immense superiority. Yes, Vance Quantum Solutions is about to completely redefine the entire paradigm of digital security. It takes a visionary corporate strategy to bring a truly global-scale product to the market. I've dedicated everything to this launch. The sheer, sickening audacity of his words was enough to make a weaker person scream. But I simply stood silently against the marble pillars, took a small sip of my drink, and checked the digital clock on my terminal screen. It was exactly 2:45 p.m. The main pitch presentations were about to begin. At the central VIP table sat Marcus Sterling, the billionaire venture capitalist, alongside his daughter, Sophia. Sophia was dressed in an incredibly flashy, expensive gown, looking at Brandon with a triumphant, possessive smirk of shared deception. They kept exchanging subtle, intimate glances across the crowded room, completely believing that within the next hour, their $5 million luxury life would be officially signed into reality. At exactly 2:55 p.m., the master of ceremonies stepped up to the central crystal podium, his voice booming loudly through the premium surround sound speaker system. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are about to begin our keynote innovation showcase to kick off the afternoon and present a revolutionary breakthrough in automated cybersecurity network defense. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Vance Quantum Solutions, Brandon Vance. The entire room erupted into thundering applause. Brandon turned, adjusting his gold Swiss watch, and walked proudly up the steps to the main stage. The main lights in the pavilion dimmed for the live technical demonstration. A massive 30-foot high-definition projection screen lowered slowly from the steel rafters behind the center stage podium. Brandon stood confidently at the microphone, basking in the bright glare of the spotlight, his hands resting easily on the polished glass edges of the lectern. "Thank you, everyone," Brandon began, his voice resonant, smooth, and deeply practiced. In the modern digital age, security is not just about code, it's about absolute control, absolute dominance. When a predator tries to infiltrate your network, you must have an unyielding system that can completely eliminate their entire presence within seconds. Today, I am proud to run a live, full-scale deployment of our core system, connected straight to our primary corporate cloud network. While his beautiful, empty words echoed through the silent ballroom, I quietly reached into my small evening clutch. I pulled out my secure mobile terminal. The digital clock on my screen read exactly 2:59:55 p.m. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Brandon pressed the large digital execution button on his presentation remote to launch the live demo. On the massive 30-foot screen behind him, my encrypted trap code instantly woke up. The Total Clear Protocol. The silence that slammed into the grand ballroom was absolute, terrifying, and heavy, like the sudden dropping of an iron curtain. The words died completely in Brandon's throat. He stared at the massive screen behind him, every single drop of color draining from his handsome face within seconds, leaving him a ghastly ash-white color that looked horrific under the intense glare of the stage spotlight. The live demonstration layout didn't appear. Instead, the screen went completely black for a split second, and then a massive, bright red terminal prompt began to cascade down the display at an unyielding, terrifying speed. Executing script, total clear protocol. Target system, Vance Quantum Solutions, local network cleared. Backup directory, wiped. Partition tables, overwritten to 0. Primary master drive, permanently locked. A collective, unified gasp of absolute horror rippled through the crowd of 800 tech professionals. These were the city's top developers, venture capitalists, and corporate lawyers. They didn't need an explanation. They knew exactly what they were looking at. They were witnessing a total, catastrophic digital execution. Brandon's entire corporate infrastructure was being completely dismantled and erased down to the bare metal in real time. What is this? This is a technical glitch. Turn it off. Cut the feed. Brandon shrieked into the microphone, his voice cracking hysterically, a sharp, deafening feedback screeching through the ballroom sound system. He turned frantically toward the technical booth at the back of the room, waving his arms wildly. "Kill the main servers right now! Shut down the power!" But the technical booth was entirely unresponsive to his commands. The invisible script I had deployed through his own machine had completely hijacked the hotel's media network routing controls, locking every single interface down with my private cryptographic key. The screen flashed brilliantly again, but it didn't stop at the network wipe. The automated script moved to its final execution phase. The screen populated a massive, high-contrast digital folder containing the complete cloned fraud dossier of Brandon Vance. In giant, bold white text that could be read clearly by every single investor in the room, the display read, "Intellectual Property, Larceny Report, Target, Brandon Vance." Below the heading, the system began to play the high-definition security camera footage from my basement server room. The entire 800-seat ballroom watched in absolute stunned silence as Brandon appeared on screen, carefully unscrewing my server rack, cleanly clipping the data lines, and sliding my master hard drive into his briefcase with a smug, thieving smile. The crowd began to murmur in fury and utter disgust, but the script was relentless. The next slide magnified his private email logs with Marcus Sterling and his secret text messages with Sophia, displaying his explicit admission of criminal intent to steal his wife's genius, delete her startup, and run away with the $5 million funding round. The entire ballroom turned as a single, massive unit to look at Sophia and her billionaire father. Sophia's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. In her desperation to escape the burning glare of 800 people, she stumbled backward, her heels catching on the hem of her flashy gown. She crashed heavily into a luxury banquet table, knocking a massive crystal vase of dark water and ice straight into her lap, the freezing liquid soaking her dress like a physical stain. She scrambled to her feet, trying to flee toward the western exit doors, but as she reached the heavy handles, the doors were pushed open from the outside. 4 state law enforcement officers, accompanied by corporate cyber fraud investigators, stepped firmly into the grand ballroom. Brandon was shaking so violently on stage that he had to grip the edges of the glass lectern to keep from collapsing entirely onto the floor. He tried to step away from the microphone, to run down the back stairs of the stage, but Marcus Sterling stood up from the central VIP table. The old billionaire's face was completely set in a look of apocalyptic, white-hot fury. "Brandon!" Sterling's voice boomed across the silent ballroom like a thunderclap, completely unamplified by a microphone, yet vibrating with immense authority. "You miserable, fraud-ridden parasite! You forged a tech identity, you stole your own wife's brilliant design, and you tried to launder a stolen asset through my venture capital firm. You are completely finished. I will personally ensure you spend the next decade of your life inside a cold stone cage." "Marcus, please, it's a hack. My wife is a psychotic cyber terrorist. She's framing me. She manipulated the code." Brandon screamed hysterically, his voice cracking as he pointed a sweating, shaking finger directly at me as I stood calmly by the marble pillars, elegant, unyielding, and completely magnificent in my emerald green dress. The lead fraud investigator walked straight up the stage steps, his heavy boots echoing loudly on the wooden floor. He didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He grabbed Brandon's right arm, twisting it firmly behind his back, the sharp, heavy metallic snap of handcuffs clicking across the ballroom microphone for everyone to hear. "Brandon Vance, you are under arrest for grand larceny of intellectual property, identity theft, commercial fraud, and cybercrimes against a corporate entity," the investigator stated coldly, his voice broadcasting with crystal clarity to the entire silent crowd. Brandon didn't look like a global tech innovator anymore. He didn't look like a high-flying corporate executive. As they dragged him down the stage steps, his expensive designer suit wrinkling and twisting uncomfortably around his slumped shoulders, he caught sight of me. He stopped struggling against the officer's heavy grip, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and deep, burning hatred. "You did this!" he shrieked like a wild animal, his face twisting into a grotesque mask of fury. "You planned this whole thing. You completely destroyed my entire life." I stood entirely still as he was dragged past. For the very first time that afternoon, I looked directly into his eyes, letting the full, freezing weight of my authority wash over his soul. "I didn't destroy your life, Brandon. Your own greed compiled every single line of your ruin," I said, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper that carried only to him. "You forgot that you stole a master drive from a security architect. You thought you could delete my startup and run away into a luxury life, but I simply executed a total clear on your entire network, and I watched your whole false world slide down to zero." The final compilation. The aftermath of a major cyber fraud arrest is surprisingly clean. Once the flashing lights of the police cruisers left the pavilion driveway and the elite tech investors dispersed into the city night, whispering furiously about the historic scandal they had just witnessed, the true restoration of my life's work began. Because my hidden ghost protocol had perfectly tracked the physical master hard drive, federal data security officers recovered the hardware from Brandon's private office within 2 hours of his public arrest. The physical drive was returned straight to my hands, completely intact and undamaged. Because the automated script I executed was programmed with a highly specific dual-key architecture, the total clear wipe had only destroyed Brandon's false corporate server networks, his private hard drives, and his fraudulent company data. My startup's core cybersecurity code, Aegis Digital, remained perfectly protected, encrypted, and isolated inside my secure recovery folder. 3 months later, I stood in the quiet, modern hallway of the federal courthouse. The air was cool, carrying none of the toxic, heavy pressure that had suffocated my life for the past year. Inside the courtroom, Brandon stood before a senior federal judge. The expensive dark designer suit and the gold Swiss watch were completely gone, replaced by a bright orange, standard-issue state jumpsuit that hung loosely off his gaunt, diminished frame. His signature confident posture was entirely broken. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the floor, his shoulders hunched forward in deep, permanent defeat. The judge looked down from her high bench with an expression of complete, unyielding severity. "Brandon Vance, you have demonstrated a profound, clinical lack of basic human integrity," the judge stated, her voice echoing sharply off the stone walls. "To systematically strip away your spouse's professional identity, the physical manifestation of years of independent intellectual labor, and to actively defraud an investment firm simply to fund a temporary life of extreme vanity is a crime of absolute malice. This court will ensure the tech community is completely protected from your predatory behavior." She sentenced him to 10 years in a federal penitentiary, with absolutely zero possibility of early parole or structural mitigation. Sophia Sterling's family name was deeply tarnished in the tech sector, and her father's venture capital firm completely blacklisted any project associated with Brandon's past associates. As the bailiff stepped forward to guide Brandon through the heavy iron doors at the side of the courtroom, he turned his head slightly, his eyes wide with a weeping, pathetic desperation, catching my gaze through the crowd. He silently mouthed a single, empty word: "Sorry." I didn't answer. I didn't feel a single wave of hot anger, nor did I feel a single drop of personal pity. I simply picked up my laptop briefcase, turned my back on his orange jumpsuit, and walked out of the building into the clean, beautiful afternoon air. The untouchable network. True security is never found in the things that can be easily stolen, cut, or transferred away by a clever liar in the dark. It is not found in a multi-million-dollar investment fund, an expensive gold watch, or a premium designer suit meant to project an image of false power to a room full of strangers. This grueling, painful journey taught me that the only structures that truly endure are the ones built on absolute honesty, real genius, and unyielding personal integrity. I returned to my quiet home that evening. The house was peaceful, clean, and completely clear of the heavy shadow of deception that had occupied its rooms for over a year. I sat at my desktop, looking at the glowing monitors of my reconstructed server rack in the basement. My startup, Aegis Digital, had officially launched that morning, securing 3 major independent corporate contracts within its first 6 hours of public deployment. My code was completely secure, my assets were protected, and my life was entirely my own again. Brandon believed he was a master tech consultant who could treat my life's work like his personal property to buy his mistress a luxury life. He thought that because I was a quiet software engineer who supported his chaotic career for years, I would never have the strength to look beneath his beautiful, smiling facade. But he completely miscalculated the absolute power of an architect who knows exactly how to trace a digital footprint, expose a fraud, and write a code that can completely clear a predator out of the network. As you look at your own life and the people you choose to trust with your dreams, always remember to look past the charming words and the grand, magnificent promises of a false empire. True strength is the peace of mind that comes from knowing your foundation is concrete, your actions are clean, and your independence is entirely untouchable. Lies and greed carry a mathematical certainty. They are destined to collapse under the heavy weight of their own corruption every single time. And when the smoke finally clears from the stage, the people who operated with true loyalty, silent genius, and fierce devotion will always be the ones left standing, completely safe in a world that no thief can ever delete.